All right, so today we're diving into some pretty interesting waters.
Yeah?
Linda McMahon as Education Secretary.
Yeah, it's making some waves for sure.
It is, and we've got a really interesting mix of sources today. You guys sent us a bunch from Fox News and the Washington Post, CNN, even a little sprinkle of BBC in there.
Yeah, a good mix.
So it seems like you're looking for the full picture here, not just one side of the story.
Definitely, yeah.
So with that in mind, the big question we're going to try to tackle today is, can McMahon's business savvy really translate to success in the world of education?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is a million-dollar question.
It's fascinating. We've got, from the wrestling ring to the halls of government.
I know. It's pretty wild.
Quite a journey, yeah.
Quite a journey.
There's a lot to unpack.
So let's start with the obvious, her time at the helm of WWE.
Right.
I mean, not exactly your typical breeding ground for an education secretary, right?
Not necessarily, no.
Yeah. But then there's also her stint as the administrator of the Small Business Administration during Trump's first term.
Right.
So is that enough
Yeah.
to equip her for this new role?
Well, some of your sources, like the Washington Post, they're skeptical. They point out that running the education department's a whole different ballgame than managing a business, no matter how large.
Right.
You're talking about shaping young minds, not just bottom lines.
And, some of the articles you sent, particularly from CNN, they highlight this stark contrast between the culture of WWE
Yeah.
and the values that we typically associate with education.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how that experience is really going to shape her approach.
For sure. And it's worth mentioning the elephant in the room.
Yes.
The allegations against Vince McMahon.
Right.
Now, Linda isn't directly implicated,
Right.
but the ongoing federal investigation, as detailed in several of your sources, that can become a major distraction during her confirmation and even throughout her tenure,
For sure.
potentially.
Yeah. It's a potential minefield.
Yeah.
Speaking of potential controversy,
Yeah.
her close ties to Trump are also raising eyebrows.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking transition, co-chair board member of Trump Media and Technology Group.
Hmm.
This isn't just a professional relationship.
Exactly. And several of your sources, including the BBC, are questioning whether those connections could lead to conflicts of interest,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to policies that might benefit Trump-affiliated businesses.
Right.
Transparency is going to be key here.
Okay, so we've got a potentially controversial figure with a unique, some might say unconventional background.
For sure.
But what about her actual stance on education policy?
Yeah.
I mean, we know she doesn't have a ton of direct experience in that arena.
True. But we can glean some insights from your sources.
Right.
Fox News, for example, points out her past support for charter schools and school choice.
Okay.
And this aligns with the broader Republican push for less federal control over education.
Interesting.
Seems like she might be leaning toward a more localized approach.
That focus on local control makes me think about funding.
Yeah.
If the federal government takes a step back, how does that impact the way schools are funded?
Right.
Because some of your sources, like the AP News articles that you included, suggest that this could create even bigger disparities between wealthy and under-resourced districts.
That's a valid concern, and it's one that's debated extensively in your sources.
Okay.
There's talk of block grants giving states more autonomy over how they spend federal education funds. Proponents argue it allows for more targeted spending, but critics worry about exacerbating existing inequalities.
It's a tricky balance for sure.
Yeah.
You've got proponents of school choice arguing that it empowers parents and fosters innovation,
Right.
while others are raising red flags about accountability and the potential for discrimination.
Yeah, we're seeing this tension play out across your
Yeah.
sources. This
Yeah.
is where it gets really interesting. We're seeing a fundamental clash of ideologies. Those who believe in a strong federal role in ensuring equity and quality versus those who favor a more decentralized system, prioritizing parental choice and local control.
So with Linda McMahon potentially at the helm of the Department of Education, it seems we're headed for some potentially seismic shifts in the education landscape.
Yeah.
But are those shifts going to be for the better or for the worse?
That's the question we're grappling with here.
That is the question, and it's a big one.
It is.
But by examining the evidence and the arguments presented in your sources,
Right.
hopefully we can start to form a more informed perspective.
Absolutely.
All right, we've laid some groundwork here,
Yeah.
but we're just getting
We're
started.
just getting started.
Let's dig deeper into the potential impact of Linda McMahon's leadership on specific areas of education policy in our next segment.
Sounds good.
Stay with us.
Welcome back to our deep dive. So let's shift our focus now to the potential impact of Linda McMahon's leadership on specific areas of education policy.
Okay, so We talked about this idea of a more localized approach to education, less federal oversight.
Right.
What does that actually look like in the classroom? I mean, what could this mean for what kids are learning day to day?
Well, one area where we could see significant change is the curriculum.
Okay.
Several of your sources, particularly those from Fox News, suggest that McMahon's appointment could lead to a greater emphasis on school choice and charter schools, which often have more flexibility in designing their curricula.
So less of a one-size-fits-all national curriculum and more freedom for states and individual schools to decide what's important.
Right, and that's a pretty radical departure from the current system.
It is. It is.
Okay.
And your sources present a mixed bag of opinions on this.
They do, yeah.
Some, like those from the Washington Post, express concern about a potential decline in educational standards and widening achievement gaps if there's no national baseline.
Yeah, that's a valid concern.
Yeah, I could see how that could be a problem. If every state is doing its own thing, how do we ensure that all students are getting a quality education regardless of where they live?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is if it is.
And it ties into the debate over standardized testing.
Okay.
We know from your sources that Republicans and likely McMahon herself are skeptical of excessive federal involvement in education.
Right.
So could her leadership lead to less emphasis on national standardized tests?
It's definitely possible. And some of your sources, particularly those from CNN, argue that standardized tests are too narrow a measure of student achievement anyway.
Right.
Maybe this could be an opportunity to rethink how we assess learning and hold schools accountable.
It's an interesting thought, and your sources present a range of alternative assessment methods, like portfolio-based assessments, which focus on showcasing a student's work over time, rather than relying solely on one high-stakes exam.
Okay, so potentially big changes on the horizon for curriculum and testing.
Yeah.
What about the teachers? How might a more localized approach to education impact teacher training?
Well, right now there are national accreditation standards for teacher training programs.
Right.
But some of your sources, especially those leaning towards the Republican perspective, suggest that these standards could be loosened or even eliminated under McMahon's leadership.
So more freedom for states to decide how to prepare their teachers.
Exactly.
I wonder if that could lead to more innovation and experimentation in teacher training, or would we see a decline in quality?
That's a question that several of your sources grapple with.
Okay.
There's definitely potential for both positive and negative outcomes.
Sure.
On the one hand, giving states more autonomy could lead to more tailored training programs that meet the specific needs of their communities.
Right.
But on the other hand, it could also create inconsistencies in teacher quality across the country.
And without those national standards, how do we ensure that all teachers are receiving adequate preparation to enter the classroom?
Yeah, it seems like a risky move.
It does, and it highlights this central tension in this whole debate, the balance between local control and ensuring quality and equity across the board.
Absolutely, a key tension.
Right, it seems like that's a theme we're seeing pop up again and again as we explore the potential impact of McMahon's leadership.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's talk about money.
Okay.
School funding is always a hot-button issue.
Always.
How might McMahon's approach to education, particularly her emphasis on local control, affect the way schools are funded?
Well, some of your sources, particularly those from Fox News and the AP, highlight a concept that's gaining traction among Republicans.
Okay.
Block grants.
Block grant.
This basically means giving states a fixed sum of federal money for education with fewer restrictions on how they can spend it.
So instead of the federal government dictating specific programs or initiatives, they'd just hand over a chunk of money and let the states figure it out.
Yeah, basically.
That sounds like it could either be brilliant or disastrous,
It could go either way.
depending on how it's implemented.
Exactly, and your sources present a range of opinions on this. Proponents argue that block grants give states more flexibility to address their unique needs, while critics worry that it could lead to even greater disparities between wealthy and poor districts.
I can see both sides of that argument. On the one hand, more flexibility could allow states to be more innovative and responsive to local needs. But on the other hand, if you have some states prioritizing education more than others, wouldn't that just exacerbate existing inequalities?
That's a key concern, and it's one that we need to be mindful of as we evaluate the potential consequences of this kind of shift in funding.
For sure, for sure. All right, so we've got potential changes to curriculum, teacher training, and school funding. This is starting to paint a pretty complex picture of what the education landscape might look like under Linda McMahon's leadership.
It certainly is, and we can't forget another key piece of the puzzle that's been heavily discussed in your sources, school choice.
Right, we touched on this earlier from what I'm seeing in these articles. She seems to be a big proponent of charter schools and voucher programs.
That's right, and these are topics that consistently spark heated debates, as evidenced by the diverse range of opinions presented in your sources.
Can you remind us what those are and why they're so controversial?
Of course, charter schools, as you know, are publicly funded but independently operated,
Right.
giving them more freedom to design their curriculum and choose their teaching methods.
Okay.
Voucher programs, on the other hand, use public funds to help parents send their children to private schools.
So both are essentially ways to give parents more options beyond their assigned public school.
Exactly.
But what are the main arguments for and against these approaches?
Well, supporters, particularly those featured in your Fox News sources, argue that school choice empowers parents, fosters competition, and leads to innovation and better outcomes for students.
Uh-huh.
They believe that giving parents more control over their children's education leads to more engaged and invested families.
That makes sense, but I'm guessing there's another side to this story.
There is.
What are the concerns that people have about charter schools and vouchers?
Well, critics, often highlighted in your sources from the Washington Post and CNN, argue that school choice diverts resources away from traditional public schools,
Okay.
which still serve the vast majority of students. They worry about a survival of the fittest scenario where the most disadvantaged students are left behind in underfunded public schools, while those with more resources have greater access to better options.
And some of your sources also express concern about accountability.
Yeah.
If we're talking about public funds being used for private schools or independently run charter schools, how do we ensure that they're meeting the same standards as traditional public schools?
That's a key point of contention.
It is.
There's a lot of debate about how to monitor and regulate these alternative schools to ensure quality, prevent discrimination, and protect the interests of all students.
It sounds like school choice is a complex issue with valid points on both sides.
Very complex.
And it seems like this is an area where Linda McMahon's leadership could have a significant impact. If she pushes for more school choice, it could really shake things up.
Absolutely, and it's an issue that's likely to be front and center during her confirmation process and throughout her tenure as education secretary.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Potential changes to curriculum, teacher training school funding, and the whole debate around school choice. We're starting to see how these pieces might fit together under Linda McMahon's leadership.
It's a complex puzzle for sure.
It is a complex puzzle.
And in our next segment, we'll zoom out a bit and explore some of the broader implications of McMahon's appointment and what it might mean for the future of education in this country. Stay tuned.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Linda McMahon and her potential impact on education. And, we've gone through her background, we've looked at the potential controversies, and we've really dove deep into those weeds of policy changes on the horizon.
Yeah, we have.
But now I kind of want to step back and look at the bigger picture.
Yeah, that big picture.
What does this appointment tell us about the state of education in America
Yeah,
and where things might be headed?
right. Well, it's time to connect the dots. What does this all mean?
Exactly. And one thing that keeps popping up in these articles, especially from sources like the BBC and the Washington Post, is this idea of a fundamental shift in bringing a business mindset to education. But can that really work?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? I mean, we know that she's coming from a world where the bottom line is king,
Right.
but education is about so much more than just profit margins and efficiency.
Yeah, it's about nurturing young minds, fostering critical thinking, preparing students to be engaged citizens.
Yeah.
I mean, these aren't things you can easily measure on a spreadsheet.
Exactly. And some of your sources, particularly those with a more critical perspective, worry that a business-first approach could lead to a narrow focus on standardized testing and data-driven results, potentially overlooking the social and emotional aspects of learning.
Yeah, it's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Right.
But then again, maybe that's what's needed, a fresh perspective.
Yeah.
Someone who can shake things up and challenge that status quo.
Yeah.
Several of the Fox News articles you provided seem to think so.
Right. Well, it's a fascinating debate.
It is.
And it really speaks to that larger ideological divide that we're seeing in America today, and not just in education, but in so many areas.
Right.
This push towards smaller government, more individual choice, less regulation, it's all reflected in this appointment.
So it's not just about Linda McMahon. It's about this whole wave of thinking that's pushing for a different kind of America, a different kind of education system.
Precisely. And, her success or failure in this role could have ripple effects far beyond the Department of Education.
Yeah.
It could impact everything from how we fund schools to what our children are learning in the classroom.
That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, a lot of pressure.
She's walking into this whirlwind of challenges.
It is a whirlwind,
A
actually.
polarized political climate, a system that's already grappling with funding shortages and teacher burnout, and then we've got the lingering impact of the pandemic.
Yeah, it is a daunting task, to say the least.
Yeah.
But she's also in a position to make a real difference, for better or for worse. And that's why it's so important for us to stay informed and engaged,
Right.
to hold our leaders accountable, and to advocate for the kind of education system that we believe in.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want to leave our listener with?
I think it's this Linda McMahon's appointment is a sign of the times.
Okay.
You know, it reflects this shift in thinking about the role of government individual choice and the purpose of education itself.
Yeah.
And it's a debate that's far from over, and it's one that we all have a stake in.
Absolutely. Well, you've given us a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Thanks for guiding us through this deep dive.
My pleasure. Always happy to delve into these fascinating topics with you.
And to you, dear listener, keep questioning, keep exploring, keep learning. There's a whole world of knowledge out there, and we'll be here to help you navigate it until next time.